All right, so let's kick it off. So, welcome everyone. So, this is a webinar on how to build a valuable business and how to cash out with confidence. So, over the next 15, 20 minutes or so, I'm going to cover the how to build a valuable business part. And then I'm joined by Ed Stubbs from Zentum Financial Planning, and he's going to cover the cash out with confidence part. So the part that I'm going to cover is really a way to think about business valuation and a way to help you focus on the things in your business that actually drive the most value, which ultimately make it worth more and then more attractive to buyers. As small business owners, it's very easy to get lost in the weeds and not really understand where we should be focusing our time in terms of building value and how to build a valuable business. And so this is all about trying to simplify that and having a simple way to think about it. Now, this is a pretty broad topic and it could go off in a lot of different directions. So I just want to caveat it by saying that we could go into business valuation, we could talk rows on that. We could talk about how to make a business more sellable, more attractive to buyers. This won't be so much focused on those things. We'll save that for another webinar, but this will be focused on what I just mentioned. So a framework to think about valuation and then a way to help you make better decisions in your business so you can use the numbers as a starting point and grow the business systematically rather than by guessing. So I'm going to give a quick background on who I am, and then Ed will run through who he is and the bit that he's going to cover as well. So my name's Tom Griffiths. I spent the first 7 years or so of my career at JP Morgan, 3 years in the corporate investment bank, and then 4 years in asset management. When I was there, I worked with very big businesses. JP Morgan is obviously a whale in itself, but asset managers, insurance companies, pension funds, and I supported them with operational advice, generally making things more efficient, strategy and pricing, and then ultimately improving the returns for their investors. And I learned a lot while I was there and left JP Morgan about 4.5 years ago. And essentially, what I now do is I take the best practices that I learned from working at JP Morgan and with those very big businesses and take the bits that I can and support small business owners with the financial aspects that they need support with. And since leaving JP Morgan, I've worked with about 30 clients or closer to 35. I currently work with 11 and I work generally in the capacity as a fractional CFO, like a part-time CFO for them. I help them essentially use their numbers to make better decisions so they can grow the business. And I've been involved in mergers and acquisitions, exits, and fundraising and other bits and pieces like that. So I'll hand it over to Ed, and he can give an introduction on himself and the bits that he's going to cover.
Hi guys, I'm Ed Stubbs, Chartered Financial Planner at Zentum Corporate. Um, my sort of background is I've been at Zentum for 11 years, and I solely focus on helping people, I suppose, come unstuck with their decision making around whether it's the right thing to exit, whether it's the right thing to partially sell, or whether actually they just need to scale up for another couple of years. And it's we're almost I call ourselves a chief personal finances officer, in terms of doing the strategic work, helping people make those decisions, and then start to build a plan as to what that exit can do for them, and also post sale invest and structure their estate at that point. So that's what we're trying to achieve.
Brilliant. Okay. Thanks, Ed. So I'll give a bit of context around why we're doing this and why this content is actually important and valuable to business owners. So depending on where you look, you'll see some pretty frightening stats around how many businesses actually get sold. I think the official stat is something like 80% of those listed for sale never get sold. But if you include the businesses that aren't listed, then you can get something closer to 90, even 95% of businesses that don't actually manage to sell. And I think there are a few reasons behind this, but I think you can boil those reasons down into a few quite simple ones. One, the business or businesses weren't built to sell in the first place. So they weren't built as valuable businesses and they weren't built to be attractive to a buyer. Many owners create themselves high paying jobs or sometimes low paying jobs and not an asset that somebody else would actually want to buy. Number two is the owner thinks the business is more than it's worth, and so an agreement is never reached. And then number three, which the finance nerd side of me believes, is that the business was never built to produce consistent positive cash flow. Because if you can build a business that produces consistent positive cash flow and isn't too dependent on the owner, then you're going to be able to sell that business to someone. It's an attractive business or an asset for someone else to buy. So I think those are the main reasons. And whilst this isn't a webinar necessarily on how to make a sellable business, like I said earlier, this is a topic that we can go into for hours on that, and we will in future webinars. But this one is focusing on how you can think about business valuation years in advance of a potential sale and how you can ultimately build your business into one that does generate consistent positive cash flow. And once that's taken care of, the rest of it becomes much easier. So it doesn't happen overnight. It has to start, or planning has to start years in advance. But what I'm going to give you today is something to think about years in advance of that exit. And if your business becomes more valuable or you build it so that it becomes more valuable, then that gives you, the seller or the business owner, more options. So, firstly, more people are going to want to buy it. It's going to be a more enjoyable sale process because you're going to have more of a choice about who you sell the business to. And then you can actually choose to either sell it or keep running it. And lots of business owners get to the point where they're ready for sale and actually decide, actually, I'm going to carry on running this thing because it's much more enjoyable than it was 2 years ago. And you can focus on the parts that you most enjoy. So, in the first 15, 20 minutes or so, we're going to cover, firstly, how to think about business value. So, cutting through the jargon, demystifying lots of the M&A language that generally just confuses business owners, and we'll keep it simple. So, things like EBITDA and all that stuff, that's important, but it's not what you need to actually understand the growth or the value of the business. Secondly, why most business owners feel stuck and why that's actually not a surprise. And then thirdly, a simple framework to solve that problem and for building value. So we focus on the things that drive the most value in the business and pretty much ignore everything else. And then number four is how to use all that information to make better decisions to actually move the business forward and build a more valuable business. So from the outside, who can relate to any of the following? The business looks great, looks successful, looks like you're doing really well. You've got loads of revenue coming in, clients are happy, referrals are good, reviews are good, you've got strong growth plans for the business. But then when you kind of lift up the bonnet and look at what's actually going on inside, everything feels quite different to that. And things might feel like they're going well in the strategy meetings, but in reality, you don't really know what's going on. Business is good according to the accountant. You're profitable on paper. The accountant says you made 100 grand or 200 grand or 300 grand last year, but you look at the bank account and there's pretty much nothing there. The accountant says you owe HMRC 50 grand. You've got a payroll bill coming up for another 50 or 60, and then suddenly you're in the red by 10. But you're still holding on to what your accountant said, which is that you made a profit last year or you're currently profitable. So where is all that money going and what's the difference between profit and cash? So that's point one. We'll come on to the actual difference between profit and cash in a bit. But secondly, it's hard to actually explain what's driving the results. You don't have much visibility of what's going on in the business, and you're not really sure what to focus on. You're kind of in BAU mode where you're keeping things ticking over. You're keeping busy because it feels better to keep busy, but it's hard to keep your finger on the pulse because you don't really know what you should be keeping your finger on. So the business feels fragile, and you make decisions based on how much money is in the bank account or gut-based decisions, and then that ends up getting you into more of a pickle down the road. So the next slide. So why is that no surprise? I know all that sounds worrying, but it's actually very common. And I don't think I'm yet to meet a business owner who isn't or hasn't been through these problems. And it doesn't mean the business is failing. It usually just means the business has got more complex and it's outgrown the basic structures that it started with. And so this is a gap you see in SMEs before they transition to slightly bigger businesses which have proper management structures in place. So typically 2 to about 15 million is where this gap becomes a real problem. So they have an accountant, they have a bookkeeper, but both of those are backwards looking. So they tell you what happened in the past. They might produce fancy reports, but there is still no one to actually bridge that gap between the backwards looking accountant and bookkeeper and then the forwards looking CEO, business owner, and leadership team who really only care about the now, the today, and what's going to happen next and how do we make more money. So that's where I come in, and that's the gap that we're going to be talking about filling today. And that gap becomes a bottleneck to business growth and value creation because most business owners, they start a business because they're really good at something. Builders start a construction company, dentists start a dental practice, marketers start marketing agencies. I'm a finance person. I started a finance business. I'm good at finance. I'm not good at marketing or sales. But in order to run a business, we have to learn all the other parts of the business in order to make the whole thing work. So the areas that are outside our area of expertise, so for me, that was sales and marketing. To begin with, all I wanted to do was build models. So I thought, okay, great. If I build a business doing this. I can just build models for people all day long. But I very quickly realized that if I can't market myself and sell, I'm not going to have anyone to build models for. So most business owners didn't sign up to running a business because they wanted to get to understand profits and cash flow. But that becomes a very necessary part of the business that you have to understand in order to run a successful business. And so back to the point that I made earlier, what do we do when things get hard to understand? Is we just keep busy. We keep busy doing things to make us feel better, but we don't actually fix the real problem in the business. So we often assume that more sales will fix the problem, and sometimes that's true, but more sales at a lower profit margin is less profit. More effort without the right focus on the right things doesn't fix the right problems. So we stay busy, things get more overwhelming, the value of the business doesn't change, and we're back to this gap that we've got highlighted here on this slide. So once we can get to understand the numbers and have a simple way of knowing what's working, what's not working in the business, and then using that information to make data-driven decisions, then that gap gets filled and the problems that I just mentioned subside because we can be more deliberate and more focused about what we're actually working on. So somehow we've got to get that gap filled. And either you can learn how to do it yourself, which is what I'm going to teach you today, or you can get someone external to come and help you. Okay. And ultimately, this is about control and having a grasp of the numbers and clarity. So, what actually drives the value of a business? So, like I said earlier, this can get complicated, especially if you're not really into finance. If you Google it, you're going to see things like EBITDA multiple and loads of other stuff, which probably don't make much sense. So let's just simplify it down into three things. It's profit, cash, and risk, i.e., you want more profit, more cash, and lower risk. Profit is all your revenue minus all your expenses. Like I said earlier, chasing revenue isn't always the answer, especially if your costs are going to rise faster. You don't necessarily end up being better off. You're going to end up doing more work for more clients for less money at the end of the day. The next one is cash flow. So how much of that profit actually turns into cash in the bank? Profit's all good, but if that doesn't turn into cash in the bank, then it's all a bit of a waste of time. And cash is really what keeps the lights on. And then thirdly, risk. So would you buy a risky business? If you were a buyer, what risks in your business would you raise as a red flag? Things like customer concentration, dependency on the owner, can the business run without you? Do the numbers make sense? So with those 3 points in mind, you can forget about all the other stuff you learn about valuation. If you just walk away with those three things to think about valuation, we want to increase our profit, increase our cash, and reduce our risk, then you're going to end up with a more profitable business. So taking that one step further, how do we actually do those things? So what we're aiming to do here is generate more cash in the business and then use that cash to fix the risks that we have in our business. Cash solves all problems in a business. Marketing problem, cash is going to solve it. Sales problem, cash is going to solve it. Managerial problem, leadership problem, finance problem, cash is going to solve that problem. But a lack of cash, on the other hand, means that we can never fix the problems, or it's going to be very difficult to, and we have a very stressful time actually running the business. Okay, so our goal is to maximize cash or cash flow and use that cash to reinvest into the business to generate more cash and then reinvest that cash into fixing the risks that we carry in the business. And that is how we build a valuable business. Okay, so taking that one step further, the way I like to think of this, which apparently makes sense, so we're going to go with this, is to think of your business like it's a washing machine. So every washing machine in the world is made up of the same parts. Maybe, maybe not, but let's just assume they are. Every the parts are exactly the same for all washing machines. Now, if something's broken, you find the part of the washing machine that's broken and you fix that part. You don't replace every single part in the washing machine and you don't work on the bits that are already working properly. You just find the bit that's not working. Okay. So applying that to your business, all businesses are the same. They're made up of exactly the same parts, whether you're Uber or Amazon or Facebook, or you're a one-person dental practice on a high street, or you're a hairdresser with 100 shops. They're all exactly the same. So our job as business owners is to understand those parts, which I'm going to go through in a second, get clear on what those parts are and how they're performing every month, and focus our attention on fixing the parts that aren't working properly. And if we consistently fix the parts that aren't working properly, our profit and cash are going to increase, and we're going to be able to use the excess cash that we have to fix the risks that we have in our business. And that is how you build a more valuable business. Okay, so diving into the actual parts, I'm conscious of time here. So we have revenue drivers, cash flow drivers, and profit drivers. And like I said, these are the same for every business. This is then broken down. Apologies, this is a bit pixelated. but we can share a nicer version with you later. So breaking them down into revenue, profit, and cash. I'll go through these quickly. No need to take notes. I'll give you a copy of these later. Like I said earlier, a common question that I get is why is profit and cash different? Or if we made a profit, then why is there no cash in the account? And this diagram explains it. So, for example, we might end up with profit when we get to this line here, the operating profit line. But then we have all of these other drivers that affect our cash flow. So, for example, if we made 100 grand in profit, but then one of our clients doesn't pay us, then that affects our cash flow, but it doesn't affect our profit until we write it off. If we have to pay last year's tax bill, then that also affects our cash, but it doesn't affect our profit. So that's just a couple of examples of the difference between profit and cash. But we can go through this in a bit more detail in another session. But these drivers, they explain every single change in every number in your business. You can break these drivers down into more drivers. So, for example, you can break revenue and marketing costs down into things like LTV and CAC and bits like that, depending on the industry you're in. But fundamentally, all businesses are driven by these numbers, these same numbers. So, if this is a bit overwhelming for now, which it might well be, then start simple. No need to overcomplicate it, and just start with four numbers. So, revenue, gross profit, net profit, cash, and track them every month. And by tracking them every month and just being consciously aware of what they are, the insight you get from doing that will put you significantly further ahead than you currently are if you're not reviewing those numbers. Okay, so those are the drivers of the business. Then what we need to do is we need to set targets. So numbers without targets are just information, and targets are what make the numbers relevant. So we start with our long-term goals, 3 to 5 years. Where do we want to be? Do we want to sell the business? What's the valuation we want to achieve? And we reverse engineer that into financial goals for the business. And then for each one of these numbers, each year we have a target for them, for these 16 drivers that I've just been through. So each year we're going to know whether we're on track or not on achieving our target. Then we need to have a scoreboard to track these numbers. So I've tried every single piece of software you can think of for finding the best way to track these numbers, and I haven't landed on anything better than a simple Excel spreadsheet or Google Docs. So you've got months going along the top, the driver going along the column, and then every month you've got your target, and you compare your target to your actual number, red, amber, green across the business. How are we doing? And that way you can simply see across the whole business what is working and what is not working. Next, we need to use that to actually drive decision making. So, a short meeting every month, review the numbers, look at the scoreboard, look at what's working, what's not working. We focus on attacking the bottleneck every month and not everything else. So, back to the washing machine analogy, we're focusing on the thing that is actually making the machine not work. We're not focusing on the bits that are working properly or that are even okay-ish. We're focusing on the big problems every month. It's forward looking. We spot the issues early. Conversations are going to become much more focused with the team, and everyone is working from the same facts, i.e., the numbers. We're making data-driven decisions here. We're not guessing based on how much money is in the bank account. And from that, we create objectives, simple objectives for the next 30 days, and then break those objectives into tasks. So who's doing what in order to help us achieve those objectives and get the business back on track. Next month, we come back to the same meeting, we review the task list. Did it get done? Yes or no? If yes, brilliant, on to the next one. If not, why not? Did we set the wrong target or was there a performance issue? And that's kind of how we micromanage without actually micromanaging as well. Okay. Once we've got that implemented, and assuming we're doing it correctly, profit and cash improve. We use our excess cash in the business to fix the risks in our business. By definition, as that happens, the value of the business improves. If we've got a dependency on the owner problem, then we can hire a new manager, or we can gradually shift client relationships to people in the team instead of being dependent on the owner. And risk reduce over time when we're very deliberate in fixing them, and the business becomes easier to run. Okay, so this isn't rocket science, but it's just visibility which drives different behavior in the business. Okay. So in terms of where I fit in, back to that gap that I highlighted earlier, I don't replace your accountant or bookkeeper. I work alongside them. So like I said, they're backwards looking, and I'm here to plug that gap and help you and the business look forward and translating those numbers into better decisions so we can improve profits and cash flow and reduce the risks in the business and keep focus on those long-term objectives. Where do we want to be in 3 to 5 years, and making sure that we're on track to achieving those and the decisions being made are in line with that. So that's it from me. That's my sort of side of it covered. I hope it didn't complicate things, but if you want to learn more about anything I've covered, then you can scan this QR code. I'll send you today's slides, so everything I've been through. That includes the 16 driver breakdown that I've been through as well. And then also a one-on-one financial assessment with me where we can talk about what's going on in your business, where you want to be in 3 to 5 years, whether it looks like you're on track or not, put together a bit of a roadmap, identify any opportunities or red flags in the business. That's completely complimentary as well. So either way, you'll leave with some clarity. If you don't get to scan this right now, then this is going to appear at the end as well after Ed's section. So I'll hand it over to Ed. So I've covered the valuable business part. Now Ed's going to cover the cashing out with confidence part.
Thanks, Tom. Do you want to go on to the next slide?
Oh yeah. Just to check for everyone watching, can you now see Ed?
Hopefully. Well, I suppose I've got to talk, haven't
Yeah.
I?
Hopefully that means you.
If they can see me, great. If they can't, then that's
Okay.
fine. Yeah, so I guess I'm going to assume that actually you have built a valuable business, but you've got to a point now where you've been working on that business for a long time, and we're starting to see people or we see people with some pretty key and common pain points. So generally, people have built a great business. They have a lot of their net worth is made up of the shares of that business. You know, they might have put money aside towards houses, towards some sort of investments, pensions perhaps, but there's still a lot of risk in their personal situation. They also don't really have a sense of what the value of the business is sometimes, but also what does that mean for their personal life and for what comes next. Tends to be that sometimes the goalposts keep moving or they're a little bit hazy. We also see issues around, well, you know, the business is my identity in many ways, and I don't know what will come next. And then one of the key issues that people always talk about is, you know, I want this to have a really good impact on my family. I don't want money and transition into wealth to be a negative or net negative and to impact family dynamics and relationships. So it's a really key point that people worry about, and especially around motivation and what happens next for their children, I suppose. And so generally they feel in the pressure of a massive life decision. They don't always have great guidance on their side to really understand what their life priorities and what they want is. And that tends to be where they come to us. So they're just very stuck in their decision making about what to do with that business, probably psychologically thinking about, okay, you know, maybe it's time to do something different. But we're just there to help them make good decisions, to inform them and make good decisions. Next slide, Tom. So a quick case study, I suppose. We had clients that probably came to us 12 months ago. All of those pain points really massively concentrated from a risk perspective. They didn't really have a sense of what their business meant for their personal life in the future. There's a few issues around, you know, the business was inherited and some family relationship issues around that. And also one of the guys, there were two brothers, one of the guys was burnt out really, thinking about selling, but that was reactive really. And they had no real context for what that meant for them. And they were making reactive decisions. And they also, you know, because they've been in property for the, well, 30, 40 years, they didn't really have a sense of what would come next if they were to sell that business. So Graham came to us, panicking really, thinking about a full exit, didn't have a real sense of what it all meant and what the consequences of that were. Next slide. So we say there's 5 key areas, what we call our cash out with confidence framework, and the first being when, and there's a couple of sides to that. And where our role is helping people to really understand what risk they are running, and the fact that ultimately not making a decision is a decision in itself. You know, we want to be intentional about making a decision about what to do with the business. We tend to find that founders actually misprice the inherent risks in the business for a number of reasons. You know, sometimes perhaps they've been through a number of tough periods in the business and overvalue judgment versus sometimes luck. Sometimes there's a massive element of luck in that, and they misprice things. Um, we tend to find actually, as much as Tom is helping business owners build fantastic, valuable businesses to be able to sell them, not everybody has a real sense of the drivers of valuation, and are actually continuing to hold pretty significant risk in their business. And as with everyone, they don't really think about things like black swan events, etc. They don't appreciate the level of risk. They're also emotionally attached to their business. You know, they've probably been running it for a long time. They attach an extra value premium, which I call the blood, sweat, and tears premium. Um, and ultimately, the acquirer is going to objectively value that business based on the value to them, not the value to the person selling. So again, helping them work through that decision, or helping them work through their thinking, their understanding of valuation and how that plays into when they should be selling business. And also people delay because familiarity is safe. You know, the safe decision is to do nothing, isn't it? And actually we see people just going on a journey longer than perhaps they think they should. But ultimately what we're trying to help with is, let's just help you make a decision. And it might be that the right thing to do is scale, but at least you've become unstuck in that decision, and you're being intentional with what you're trying to do. And as Tom says, you know, then you can work backwards with your CFO to set your targets and work out what the next 2 or 3 years are. Because once you do become unstuck, actually the motivation that we've seen operators have once they have got a sense of what the business means for them, or what they want it to provide for them, the motivation goes up no end. Next slide, Tom. So what we do at the start of our process, and what we would encourage everyone to do is to really consider what their priorities and their values are in life. Sudden wealth and the transition of wealth as part of a business sale can be a real test of your existing values. I was watching a YouTube video this morning. I've got a 2-month-old little boy, and I was up at 4:30 watching YouTube videos. Anyway, it was about a guy who looks after lottery winners, and actually, it's a real sudden transition because you're not expecting it, and it's a real test of what are actually your values and what is your purpose and your priorities in life. But actually, with a business owner, and going through that transition, you have got time to do that planning. And it's so important to think about that ahead of time, and to start to think about those things. And this is the starting point to get the context and start to build a model out to understand, you know, how much is enough for you and what is the next step, I suppose, in your journey. There's a bit of work on untangling the identity that business owner has around the business. And we also say, sort of post sale, it's just about being a little bit more deliberate about pausing and understanding what is important to you, rather than making reactive and quick decisions to perhaps go on to new ventures, and the like. So, yeah, our view is these are the really important questions to ask. We're helping you articulate a clear and inspired vision for the future, one that will bring about joy, happiness, and contentment in your life, and helping you go through that transition with grace. Next slide, Tom. So how do we help people define how much is enough? Said the starting point is mapping your priorities in life. We've got an exercise where we help people. We've got a wheel or a circle that has 8 boxes, and we give people an opportunity to just sit there and think about what are the most important, up to 8 of the most important priorities in life. They rank them from most important to least. They rate how happy they are with how aligned at the moment they are with those priorities, and to think about what each of those really means for them. And that starts to play in, okay, over the next 20, 30 years of my life, And these are the most important years of my life now. What are the objectives that we want to achieve over that period of time? With the two, I suppose, most important numbers to us being, okay, just from a basic needs perspective, how much do I need? But also from an ideal lifetime spending perspective, an aspirational perspective, what would I love to have from the business? The reason for the two numbers is just we may have to make some trade-offs to be fully aligned with the priorities that those people have defined in that first meeting, and we need to know, what's our threshold over which we really need to achieve, so long as we're happy to continue the level of risk that we've got, and then on top of that, what would we love to have? So we need to understand both sides of that really, and then very quickly, it's sort of outlining their current situation. We use data-backed assumptions to build a model. And on top of that, I think it's an important point to make that actually business owners at this stage of life, and I've seen it with my dad who exited a business, they're really at the peak of their human capital, and therefore we can factor in some income post-sale. That's consultancy, whatever that might be. I've got an owner who sold and then became an artist, and he's it was his passion in life, and he started to draw an income from that. So the last point I was going to make is we do have to be very careful with the assumptions. It is a model ultimately, and what we can't do is rely on linear assumptions. So we have to randomize the assumptions. And Tom, if you go on to the next slide, got a bit of a picture about the piece of software that we use. It's the best piece of software that's available in our industry. But the point at the bottom of the page is, if you look at the graph of the hurricane, there's a level of uncertainty that we can't get away from into the future. Ultimately, post-sale, we're still going to be taking an element of risk. We can't just leave it in cash forever because inflation will, it's unlikely that we want to leave it in cash forever because inflation will eat into it, and considerably probably. But if we remain invested, we have to understand that the markets are volatile, and ultimately we don't know what that future path is going to be. And the longer the time horizon, the more that path can vary from the mean. So we have to play through a number of different scenarios and then give people a sense of how confident they can be at that particular figure. So we don't want to sell guarantees, but it's just a level of confidence. Next slide, Tom. As I say, the impact on family is massive for people, and that's where, again, the start of the process, it's important to understand and define what the family values dynamics are and what the family goals are. And only at that point can we then start to choose what structures fit in line with those goals and values. What we don't want to do is jump to structures first, to think about inheritance tax, to think about other things. I mean, it's part of the equation, but ultimately we need people to find joy, happiness, contentment. And we've seen enough people that perhaps jump to the wrong things first and have built up significant wealth but aren't happy, are miserable, aren't doing things in line with what they want, and also have impacted on their relationships. So let's start with the important things first, then get the structures in place, and finally educate and guide our children through our own behaviour. So that's massively important. We know that children and young adults, while their brain is plastic, ultimately learn from the behaviours of our parents. So it's a massively important thing to educate them, but also to lead through our own behaviours. Next slide. From a money perspective, yeah, just a quick run through of the sort of rough structure, how we'd work it. Yeah, and we'd help people understand what income they need, and then understand what risk profile they're comfortable with, noting that it is a transition from a higher level of risk, but still to some level of risk. And once we've got a sensible risk profile based on the time horizon and their tolerance to risk, We then start to build out what the best asset allocation is, the best spread of investments geographically and in terms of asset class, makes sense from there. And I like to think it's a sort of move from attack more towards defense, if you take that away as a key point. And only once we've done that point, which is a really important part, and that's when we get into the underlying fund selection. What makes up those key areas of asset allocation, and finally building out a sort of regular cadence of review just to make sure that we are, um, you know, keeping things in line with what we want them to be. Next slide. So if I go back to Graham and Lisa, we took them through a 2 meeting process at the start. They actually realised that the full exit wasn't the right thing for them to do. Actually, a partial exit of one element of the business was the right way to go. It allowed them a gradual transition, reduced their level of stress, and their concentration risk. I would say they've not fully exited yet, but we're helping them along that journey. And they've got a better understanding of how it fits in with, one Graham's mum, but also the children as well, setting them up on the right path. They've got a better diversification across asset classes, and Graham is starting to see a path away from that burnout and towards a more healthy stress, and spending his time more in line with what is important to him and Lisa and the family. And yeah, as it says at the bottom, he sort of moved from a more panic and worried state where they didn't have a real sense of what those decisions meant for the family, and they were being reactive, to a place where actually they were confident in the decision that they had made. Next slide. And just as Tom said, happy to offer anyone on the call a free strategy call, just to have a chance to talk through any pain points that you're going through. And we've also got a sort of couple of extra offers for people on this particular call, and we've got a license for the software that we can provide. We've also got a couple of resources. I'm building out an ebook series, which I've done the first one for, which I can provide, and also a scorecard, which can give you some further tips around what you can do. So yeah, that's my part, Tom. I'll leave it with you to close, shall I?
Brilliant. Yeah, we'll open it up for questions. I'll leave this screen on the page. This QR code goes to the same place as my one anyway. So anyone who does sign up for it, we'll make sure that you get everything that was promised. But anyone got any questions? No.